The Harper family was ecstatic. Their new home, a majestic Victorian house perched atop a hill, was everything they had ever dreamed of. Towering spires scratched the sky, promising grandeur. Ivy like intricate lace adorned the aged brick. Excitement bubbled, especially for young Emily and mischievous Ethan. This wasn't just a house, it was an adventure waiting to unfold. Boxes piled high, swallowed by the sheer scale of the house. Echoing halls whispered secrets, unheard by the family lost in their joy.
I see potential in every dusty corner.
Let's focus on making this place safe and warm.
Ignorance, as they say, is bliss. They were oblivious to the shadows lengthening in the corners, oblivious to the silent observation of the house itself. The first sign came for Emily. Playing in her new room, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, she saw it. Her doll, propped on a shelf, cast a shadow that stretched across the room, long and distorted. Its smiling face, twisted in the shadow play, seemed to leer menacingly. She shivered, a primal fear gripping her young heart. Later that night, John found himself captivated by the fireplace. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse with an unnatural life.
Must be fatigue.
But a seed of unease had been sown. The shadows, once comforting and familiar, now seemed different. They held a depth, a darkness that sent a chill down his spine.
It's an old house, it's bound to have its quirks.
But even she couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, an unnerving presence that seemed to lurk just beyond her sight. She found herself avoiding mirrors, afraid of what might be looking back from the shadows within. As the days passed, the strange occurrences intensified. Footsteps echoed in the dead of night. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Objects moved inexplicably. The Harpers, their initial joy replaced by a growing sense of unease, began to suspect that their dream home held a dark and sinister secret. The shadows, once dismissed as tricks of the light, were now impossible to ignore. They moved with a life of their own, growing bolder, more menacing. The shadows grew bolder. No longer content to lurk in corners, they began to encroach on the living spaces. Furniture was swallowed whole, rooms plunged into an unnatural twilight. The air, once filled with the scent of old wood and Sarah's baking, grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread.
The sunny spots are disappearing!
One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the shadows descended. The chandelier, once a source of warm light, flickered and died, plunging the dining room into darkness. Panic flared, children's cries piercing the sudden silence.
We need to leave.
John fumbled for a match, his hand shaking. The flickering flame revealed not their familiar dining room, but a distorted, shadowy world. The shadows clung to everything, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque caricatures. The children's faces, pale and wide-eyed in the dancing light, reflected the growing terror that gripped them all. John, ever the protector, ushered his family back, his voice strained but firm.
We need to leave.
Sleep, once a refuge, became an ordeal. Nightmares plagued them, filled with images of writhing shadows and disembodied whispers. The house, once a symbol of hope and new beginnings, had become a prison of fear. The shadows were no longer content to observe, they were hunting. The family, once a united front, began to unravel under the strain of the haunting. John, desperate to protect his family, buried himself in research, searching for any explanation, any solution. His face, once etched with laughter lines, now bore the weight of fear and desperation.
Please keep us safe.
Sarah, her practicality crumbling in the face of the unexplainable, found solace in prayer. Her once unwavering faith now wavered, threatened by the encroaching darkness that seemed determined to consume them all. The children, their innocence shattered, retreated into themselves.
I keep seeing them.
I'm scared, Mom.
Emily, her imagination once a source of joy, was now plagued by terrifying visions. Ethan, his youthful bravado gone, clung to his parents, seeking comfort in their dwindling strength. The shadows had driven a wedge between them, isolating them in their fear. Arguments erupted, fueled by fear and desperation.
This can't be real.
What if it is?
John, clinging to logic, refused to believe yet couldn't deny the evidence of his own senses. Sarah, her faith shaken, grappled with the possibility of something truly evil invading their lives. And all the while, the shadows pressed closer, feeding on their fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. The highway stretched before them, a ribbon of hope cutting through the darkness. With each mile they prayed the shadows were gone, left behind in that grand haunted house on the hill. But deep down, a chilling certainty settled in their hearts. They were not free, not yet. Stopping at a roadside diner, seeking solace in the warmth of coffee and the murmur of other voices, they tried to convince themselves it was over. A bad dream, a trick of the light. But as John glanced at the reflection in the window, his blood ran cold. There, clinging to the edges of their reflection, were the shadows. Darker, more defined, they seemed to mock him with their presence.
They're here.
Emily, her face pale and drawn, saw it too. Her small hand shot out, clutching her father's arm, her eyes wide with terror.
They're here.
She whispered, her voice trembling. John, his heart sinking, could only nod, his worst fears confirmed. The shadows had followed them. Their escape had been an illusion, a brief respite from the nightmare that had become their reality. The diner, once a beacon of normalcy, now felt like a trap, the shadows pressing in from all sides. Desperate, John sought answers. He scoured libraries, haunted bookstores, consulted with anyone who might have a clue about the shadows that plagued his family. He learned of ancient curses, of houses imbued with malevolent energy, of shadows that fed on fear and despair. Each tale, each whispered legend only deepened the despair that threatened to consume him. He encountered skeptics and believers, charlatans and those who genuinely wanted to help. He collected amulets, followed rituals, desperate to find something, anything, that would break the hold the shadows had on his family. But the shadows remained, a constant, chilling presence. With each failed attempt, each dead end, John felt a growing sense of hopelessness. The shadows seemed to revel in his desperation, growing stronger, bolder with every passing day. He was losing the battle and his family was paying the price. One night, driven to the brink by terror and exhaustion, John confronted the shadows. Standing in the center of their rented home, he dared them to show themselves, to reveal their purpose. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The shadows, no longer content to lurk at the edges, swirled and coalesced around him. For a moment he felt a searing pain, a blinding light, and then he saw it. The source of the shadows, the heart of the darkness. It was a void, an abyss of emptiness and despair, and it was hungry. He glimpsed images, flashes of the house's past, of the architect driven mad by his creation, of the fire that had claimed his family, their souls consumed by the shadows. The architect had tapped into something dark and powerful, something that had remained, trapped within the walls of the house. And now it was loose, feeding on the fear of the Harpers, growing stronger with each passing moment.
John stumbled back, the horrifying images seared into his mind. He understood now. There was no escape, not truly. The shadows weren't merely haunting them, they were consuming them, feeding on their terror, their despair. The knowledge settled over him like a shroud, cold and suffocating.
He looked at his family, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, and his heart ached. He had failed them. He had brought them to this place, to this nightmare from which there was no escape.
The fight drained out of him, replaced by a chilling acceptance. They were trapped, prisoners in a darkness of their own making. The shadows had won.
As the shadows pressed closer, a strange calm descended upon John. He gathered his family close, seeking solace in their embrace, their warmth a flickering candle in the encroaching darkness. He closed his eyes, whispering apologies, words of love and regret.
And then, something unexpected happened. A sound, faint at first, but growing stronger. A melody, sweet and mournful, seemed to emanate from Emily. Her eyes, usually sparkling with life, were now glowing with an otherworldly light.
The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering uncertainly. The music seemed to pain them, to hold them at bay. Emily continued to sing, her voice gaining strength, weaving a tapestry of light and hope in the face of the encroaching darkness.
What power did Emily possess? Would it be enough to banish the shadows, or would it only fuel their hunger, their rage?
John didn't know. All he knew was that for the first time since the nightmare began, he felt a glimmer of hope. Their fate hung in the balance, a single note suspended in the silence, the outcome uncertain.